Sometimes I don't think Vicar's good enough for you. Sometimes I think they should make you a saint.
We are looking for a new archdeacon.
Well, I'm hardly a typical vicar's wife, am I? Well, I'm Jewish. I was only in the chorus and I wasn't even that good. I'm not where I want to be in my life.
Nothing's ever good enough for you, is it? You spoilt bitch.
It's the ITV News next night. Then at 10:30, a scary movie with funny bits, sending up every horror film going.
Carrying ammunition. The man was immediately arrested before he could fly on to his final destination of Dubai. It is even more embarrassing for the Americans because of the focus on inbound flights from Europe. Air France forced to cancel some of their aircraft bound for Los Angeles. And that British Airways flight 223 to Washington was also the subject of numerous cancellations and delays.
On this occasion, British security staff can probably congratulate themselves, but on the other side of the Atlantic, the American authorities will need to establish very quickly what went wrong to the extent that ammunition, although not a threat to an aircraft in itself, could still be allowed to get onto the cabin of an aircraft.
Now we're going to capture her right fingerprint.
Only last week, US officials were proudly showing off the new security systems at Dulles Airport, with incoming passengers now being screened with high-tech gadgets, including finger scans and digital cameras. Now that same airport is investigating a security breach that originated here, one individual making a mockery of the airport's many layers of security. In recent weeks, the Americans have cancelled some flights into the US and they've ordered foreign airliners to use sky marshals. Now it seems they must go back to basics and re-examine their own airport screening procedures. Robert Moore, ITV News, at Dulles Airport.
President Bush has conjured up a vision of space travel to Mars and a permanent base on the moon. We will build new ships, he said this evening, and prepare for new journeys to the worlds beyond our own. It's a giant leap with a giant bill, $1 trillion. Our science editor, Lawrence McGinty, reports.
This is how Mars probably looked 3 billion years ago. Vast lakes, rivers, and perhaps some kind of life. That's why NASA wants to go there, to search for life or its remains. And now they've been given $12 billion to start the journey.
We will give NASA a new focus and vision for future exploration. We will build new ships to carry man forward into the universe, to gain a new foothold on the moon, and to prepare for new journeys to the worlds beyond our own.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
It's 30 years since American astronauts stepped onto the moon. It took them 3 days to get there. A journey to Mars would take at least 6 months. The timetable for a mission to Mars will be spread over a period of years, in fact, decades. First, a vehicle capable of making the trip could be ready by as early as 2007. NASA then hopes to establish a permanent manned base on the moon by around 2015, from which they'd launch their mission to Mars. The date for that, around 10 years later. And the cost, an estimated $1 trillion, $1,000 billion. So in 20 years or so, Hollywood could come true, but the cost of going to Mars is frightening, enough to pay off half the third world's debt. It stopped NASA in its tracks before. And scientists like Paul Murdin, a senior figure in the British space programme, say it's a waste of money.
I'm all in favour of the exploration of the planets, the scientific exploration of the planets, and I think that in human history, at some point, this is going to become our destiny. But I think at the present time, it's a grotesque waste of money.
Many scientists would prefer to see more robot explorers, much cheaper and no danger to human life. Lawrence McGinty, ITV News.
Back on Earth, the Prime Minister seems to believe things are finally moving his way in his attempts to head off the rebellion over his tuition fees. He said this evening there was no plan B. But what really made the difference today was the support of the Chancellor, Gordon Brown. To our political editor at Westminster, Nick, just what Tony Blair wanted.
Yes, just what he wanted, because frankly many Labour MPs have simply no stomach for another back me or sack me appeal from the Prime Minister. So the Chancellor's support is vital. Now frankly it shouldn't be news at all, the Chancellor backing government proposals, should it, John? But it is, because everyone here knows, the dogs on the street know, that Gordon Brown privately argued against the idea of pushing ahead with these reforms to Tony Blair, and therefore they noted and we noted very carefully in Prime Minister's questions today, when the Prime Minister spoke, just you look, there was the Chancellor nodding vigorously away.
That is a good deal for Britain's university students, and it is important that we spend this money in this way. And I have to say to him one other thing, actually. One other thing.
He addressed a group of MPs, Gordon Brown, later on. The work isn't over. Ministers say to me that now rebels are having to justify why they're opposed to tuition fees, rather than people justifying to them why they're in favour. But there are still many rebels. The battle ain't over yet.
Nick, how genuine is this sudden pals act between the Prime Minister and the Chancellor?
It's genuine. Both sides agree it's genuine. The question is why. The talk here is another deal done at another dinner. Will Gordon Brown now take over 2 years after the next election, say those who are interested in these sorts of deals? It's certainly true that what Blairite said to me, Gordon now knows that Tony isn't going, so he can't mess it up before the next election in hope of inheriting. A Brownite said to me he doesn't want to inherit a divided and disunited party. This act, the Blair and Brown Act, has taken the Labour Party to great places, and it's back on the road.
All right, thank you, Nick. Detectives hunting the killer of retired Lieutenant Colonel Riley Workman released a tape of what could be the voice of the killer. The colonel was gunned down on the doorstep of his Hertfordshire home a week ago. The tape was of a 999 call to an ambulance operator, but was made 9 hours after Mr. Riley was shot. Police hope it may jog the memory or prick the conscience of the villagers.
Hello, caller. Hello?
Hello?
The ambulance service. What's the address you want the ambulance to come to?
Ambulance? It's Harryhurst Cottage.
In what town?
That's Phoenix Pelham. That's near Buntingford.
The death of a mother at one of the country's top private hospitals has prompted an investigation into its maternity care. Laura Touche died because of the poor care she received from her midwife. Today, the Nursing and Midwifery Council struck off the midwife and ordered the investigation. The council revealed the Portland hospital had employed the midwife knowing she wasn't properly registered. Romilly Weeks reports.
Peter Touche has battled for 5 years to have the midwife whose errors led to the death of his wife held to account. Today, Grace Bartholomew was struck off the nursing register. She'd failed to give Laura Touche the most basic care after she'd had twins at the Portland hospital. As for the hospital, it had employed Miss Bartholomew knowing she wasn't fully qualified.
The decision by the NMC is an inevitable consequence of the lack of basic nursing care in the case of my late wife. I am astonished to learn from today that the Portland allocated someone of such qualifications to care for her and the twins post-operatively.
The Portland is a hospital that should have a red carpet outside its doors. Royals, footballers and film stars have all elected to have babies there. But tonight, the Nursing and Midwifery Council ruled that care standards at the hospital should be investigated.
The committee has decided, therefore, to instruct the registrar of the Nursing and Midwifery Council to establish with the local supervising authority responsible for the Portland Hospital that the necessary systems and standards are in place to comply with the standards laid down by the for the regulation of midwives by the council.
It costs around £6,000 to have a baby here at the Portland. For that, you get your own room and hotel-type comfort. But as Mr. Touche found out so tragically, 5 years ago, standards of care here fell well below what you'd expect at the most basic of NHS hospitals. The investigation should establish whether practices have improved since then. Romilly Weeks, ITV News in central London.
There's more to come on tonight's ITV News at 10, including how M&S meant miserable sales this Christmas.
It wasn't actually cold enough for them to buy the new jackets, buy the new coats and buy the new boots. And they really did have an impact on clothing in the whole of the run-up to Christmas.
and Manchester City's victory message to David Seaman tonight. Those stories and more in a moment.
Sorry.
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 The new Compact Times. Read it. You won't be sorry.
There's an extra 20% off selected sale prices at the Debenhams Blue Cross sale.
Quando você atira, eu já não sou a mira, eu sou a sua sombra, eu sou a sua sombra, já vai partir o trem, nossa festa de arromba, você vê que caguetou, que caguetou, que caguetou, que caguetou. A levada rasga, Miami drama em dois, rasga, viajo.
Welcome back. They promised us magic and sparkle in our Christmas shopping. That hasn't been reflected in Marks & Spencer's Christmas sales figures. Overall, they were down more than 2%. Bad news for M&S after they had been winning back customers in the ever more competitive high street. Here's our business editor, Caroline Kerr.
There was precious little to smile about at M&S today. For a year and a half, things were looking up at Britain's favourite department store. But now, sales are falling, and the experts are concerned that Marks & Spencer is on the decline again.
Analysts became worried when Marks & Spencer started to reduce clothes in the run-up to Christmas. Today, their fears were justified when the company unveiled disappointing figures, particularly in the key sector of women's wear.
To be fair, Marks & Spencer is not the only fashion retailer which struggled. They were all up against unseasonably good weather.
It was a very tough time for the clothing sector. Fashion suffered in the run-up to Christmas because of the very strong warm autumn. People put off buying clothes until the sale period. Of course, when there were losers, there were also winners, and one of the big winners in the run-up to Christmas was the electronics and digital sector.
The popularity of electronic gadgets meant that among this year's winners were Dixons. Today, they unveiled sales figures up by 4% on last year. The supermarket chains like Tesco's and Morrison's did well too. But Marks & Spencer topped the list of losers. Their sales figures were down by more than 2%. Other big names like House of Fraser and W.H. Smith also reported disappointing sales. The long-term threat to all the high street losers, of course, comes from the supermarkets. As they become the new department stores, they challenge the traditional chains.
If you think back to where your grandmother used to buy her Christmas gifts 30, 40 years ago, shops like Marks & Spencer's, Boots, W.H. Smith, Woolworths, maybe even Sainsbury. Those are the guys who are losing out.
Modern consumers demand value, fashion and constant innovation. The challenge for the established names on the high street is to prove they can keep up. Caroline Kerr, ITV News.
Maxine Carr won't be released from jail early. She'd applied to be freed under the electronic tagging system, but that prompted the Home Office to change the rules. Ministers say the decision to tag her can't be left to her prison governor. An inquiry into the death of the serial killer Harold Shipman began today at Wakefield Jail, where he hanged himself. His widow, Primrose, is expected to talk to the prison ombudsman, who's trying to establish Shipman's state of mind. And American record producer Damon Dash has been accused in court